everyone, and welcome to the 10th and final episode of the first season of the BPD Bunch talk show. We have a panel of people who are in functional recovery from borderline personality disorder, and each week a few of us get together to discuss BPD-related topics to help give you insights into the different ways BPD can be expressed in someone's life. We also cover the different paths we followed on our recovery journeys to give you hope and direction for your own. For our first season, we've been talking about each of the 9 BPD symptoms, our experiences with them, and what's helped us overcome them. I'm your host, Xannie, and today I am here with Alex, Lena, and Devon. How's everybody doing today?
Good.
All right.
Cold.
Hanging in there? Yeah.
So today we're going to be talking about the 9th and final symptom listed in the DSM-5, stress-related paranoia and dissociation. So we're going to start by talking about dissociation. So I just want to explain a little bit about what dissociation is. So it's basically the way that our mind kind of copes with too much stress, and it often happens as a result of trauma. It's a very broad term and involves like a number of different experiences. A lot of these experiences can be very normal and not pathological, but depending on really how intense it is and how it affects your life, it can become more problematic. So it really involves like a disconnection between like someone's thoughts and experiences. It can affect their sense of who they are, and how they relate to their feelings. So there's a lot of types of dissociation that are very common. So this could be like when you're driving and, you don't remember the last 10 minutes of your drive, and that's very common. But some of the main forms of dissociation are derealization and depersonalization. So when people experience derealization, it often feels like you're disconnected from everything going on around you. It might feel like you're like in a movie and everything seems completely unreal around you. And then depersonalization is kind of more like an out-of-body experience. Some people can experience like they feel like they're looking at themselves from outside of themselves, or like they might look at their hands and feel like these aren't my hands, or looking in the mirror and feeling like that's just like it's not you who you're looking at in the mirror. So in individuals with BPD, this often happens during periods of very high stress. I think particularly when there's interpersonal stress or stress related to trauma. And then also when we experience like really intense emotions, we can experience dissociation, or even like after like a really extreme emotional episode, we might feel dissociated afterwards. It kind of like numbs the pain in a way, which sounds great, but it can actually be pretty maladaptive, and prevent you from like really experiencing and being able to work through your emotions and difficult thoughts. So for me, I think that my experiences with dissociation were more mild. I've kind of come up with like 3 different forms, and these aren't like necessarily official terms, but the way I describe it is, so when I was in the height of my BPD and it was at its worst, I experienced a lot of derealization. It kind of constantly felt like life just wasn't real. I have a lot of like memories of, being on the subway every day, going back and forth to DBT treatment, and just kind of feeling like everything around me just felt like a movie. Like I was just not in reality. And it was pretty intense then. And then there's another type of dissociation that I experienced, which is really just like intense zoning out. And this happened to me a lot especially when I was in therapy, and it still happens sometimes in therapy, but I would just kind of like feel like my eyes were starting to glaze over, and I'd be like staring at one thing, and like everything else around you just starts to feel like fuzzy. Like you can hear what someone else is saying to you, but it's just like all echoing in your head, and it feels like you have to like pull yourself out of that like headspace. It can be really difficult. And then the last kind of dissociation I think I experienced is kind of more like a numbing type of dissociation, which when I have like really extreme emotions, especially like if I get into a fight with someone, or like after, like an hour of crying or something, I tend to just feel really like numb afterwards, which is kind of nice because I don't have to feel the pain associated with that, at least for the short term. But I have learned over time that usually when I wake up in the morning or later in that day, once the dissociation wears off, I feel terrible. So I've kind of had to like learn to expect that later on, and just kind of see it as maybe not the most helpful thing, that it really numbs me out. So what kinds of dissociation have you guys experienced?
I definitely experienced a lot of the just like feeling like my body is like wrapped in gauze, like it's like feeling like I could, I don't know, it's hard to describe, right? It's like a feeling like I wasn't real, right? Like, or that I just wasn't in the world, was probably the biggest way I experienced it. Or like you're describing the numbing, for sure. That's something I think that's for me, and also like as a therapist, that's one of the hardest things for people to like learn how to stop doing, is like, because we learn how to like combat the like really intense mood swings with, okay, now I'm just going to numb it out. And so that's not an adaptive, I mean, it's an adaptive response, but it's not going to be an effective response for your lifetime, right? To just numb intense emotions. And so that's one of the hardest things for me, even still, when I experience intense emotions, to like allow myself to fully experience them without being like, okay, I'm going to just do anything to move away from them right now. Those were probably the two biggest ones for me, for sure.
Sorry, can I quickly add something to add to my beginning thing that I think is important?
Mm-hmm.
The dissociation that's experienced with BPD is really transient, meaning that it's like short-lived. It can last for like a few minutes to a few hours, but it's not like an everyday experience for most people. Usually when it becomes more intense and you're dissociated like all the time, it becomes more of a dissociative disorder. So in BPD, it's really just more of a short-lived kind of experience of under intense stress or like trauma memories.
I think I'm often dissociated from my emotions. It feels almost like I'm not entirely here, and that emotion is just like kind of right behind me. Like I know it's there, but I'm not really experiencing it. When it gets really intense, the level where I feel like it's a problem is when it gets to this like brain fog level, sort of that wrapped in gauze sensation, but like in your mind, where it's like you see things and you hear things, but you're just not quite quick enough to grab them. They just sort of elude you. If I'm having a conversation while dissociated, a lot of the points will be gone, and there's just like kind of random bits. It's almost like looking through a flip book with like half the frames missing.
It's like a loss of control problem.
Yeah.
I feel that too. And I've like, there have been periods of time where I've just like lost a chunk of time, and it's so unsettling. And I'm like, was I aware in the moment? I'm not even sure. But I feel like I've experienced this symptom on so many different levels because I also have PTSD. So I think it's a different kind of dissociation. It wasn't so much a like massive problem for me prior to like having trauma. Then after I experienced trauma, like I would just be like sitting, making art, like doing my thing, and would just stare at the wall and like not be able to break that like eye contact with the wall.
Eye contact with the wall. I really love that imagery.
That's how I feel when I'm really dissociated too. Like, especially in therapy, it's like it always happens when I'm talking about something particularly difficult and like really emotional. And then I'm just like staring off at something, and I hear my therapist talking to me, and I'm like, and then I have to like shake my head. I'm like, wait, sorry, what did you just say?
Mm-hmm.
Been there.
It still happens. I mean, it happens during the BPD bunch sometimes because we're talking about like these intense experiences.
It happens when I'm making art, just because I make art about my mental illness. So if I'm like, that's like the one time I do try to kind of dive deeply like into past experiences. I think there are many negatives and positives to that, but often I'll just be like, oh, yeah, maybe this is hard for me to think about. So I think, yeah, I should probably like be checking in with myself every once in a while when I'm like doing something like that.
Yeah, I think the hard thing is that what makes it so hard to stop is it's a it's an almost like an involuntary response. It's not something we consciously do necessarily, right? And a lot of it, I think a lot of people with BPD have trauma or some degree of PTSD. I definitely do. And like I was kind of touching on before, I think that response is adaptive in traumatic situations because it allows you to sort of check out, right? And then what's hard is learning how to check back in, because your body's like, I have a friend who always says like our mind moves at the speed of light and our body moves at the speed of an ass. Like, our body's like, I can't check back in. It's still scary, right? I know for me, I've been going through prolonged exposure therapy for PTSD, and I'm like having a really hard time like avoiding these memories. And my therapist is like, how are you feeling right now? And I'm like, fine. And she's like, where do you feel that in your body? I don't know, right? And then like I recently had a session where like it finally broke, but it took a while, right? Like to actually like feel these feelings.
Do you guys feel it in your body or do you not feel anything at all? Because I feel like that experience can be different for people. Like it's a feeling of nothingness, which is super unsettling. Like there are no body sensations.
Yeah. I talk to clients about this a lot because it's really common for neurodivergent people, and I believe BPD and personality disorders are a form of neurodivergence, but a lot of people with neurodivergence identify with this experience called alexithymia, which is when it's really difficult to identify like internal physical sensations. Everything just feels like everything or nothing. There's no like texture or degrees to it, and so it can be really hard to identify like what physical sensations we're having, especially with emotions, right? So like I remember when I first started therapy, like my therapist like, where do you feel that in your body? And I was like, what? Like feel it in my body? Like, no, I'm telling you I'm angry, right? Like I don't feel that in my body. And I think that's because it's really hard for us to like identify what's going on in there.
Something else that's interesting that I was just thinking about too is like, I don't know if you guys have ever had the experience of like maybe engaging in like self-harm or some kind of like, target behavior where once you're going through the situation with your therapist, you're like, I can't remember. Like, I don't remember what happened then. I don't remember what happened then because like your emotions are so intense in the moment. So like, I know that's part of the reason why it's hard to remember because your brain's not really like processing in the same way. But there's also like that piece of dissociation, like feels like you're kind of out of control, out of your body. And like, sometimes it's really frustrating when you can't remember a lot of like what was going on in the situation.
I think that might be like a huge difference of my dissociation, like BPD versus PTSD. With BPD, it's usually falling to stress. Whereas PTSD, like I feel like I could just like have an intrusive memory or something and that triggers it. But I used to think that I did not experience dissociation because I was so unaware of it, which is kind of ironic. I found like this was many years ago, but I found a journal entry that I did not remember writing, and it just totally freaked me out. And so I was like, oh, that might be what this is.
Yeah, I think it's really hard to be aware of dissociation because the whole thing about being dissociated is you're not really aware, right?
Right.
Yeah. So for me, like how I manage dissociation, the biggest thing for me is I've gotten into like different physical activities. So I swim, I dance, I roller skate. I've gotten like much more active in recovery, like not by choice, I guess, but like these things, when I'm doing them, I have to be so present, like especially like swimming. It's like I have to be so present to not drown. And so like it kind of forces me to be really like aware, but I'm active doing something, so it doesn't just feel like I'm gonna get flooded with my emotions. Like I can be present while also like be doing something with my body that feels like kind of powerful. And then like dancing and roller skating are like maybe a little more fun than swimming. And like there's usually like music involved, and it's like very like these things are like fairly like rhythmic. And I think like these like rhythmic physical activities has been a huge thing for me because they're fun and I feel like really present, but in a way that feels good. You know, it doesn't just feel like painful, you know, because I think I dissociate as a way to avoid pain. And so like doing things that keep me present but that are like enjoyable has been a huge part of working through the dissociation.
I love that. For me, it was like the first step is really just like being able to identify when you're starting to dissociate, which also like involves being able to be mindful and noticing what's going on inside your body. And then being able to like label like, okay, this is what's happening with me. Because I think I used to be very confused when that would happen because I didn't have a name for it. When I have felt like I'm completely detached from reality or if I'm like zoning out, there's like the 5, 4, 3, 2, 1 grounding exercise, which is basically like labeling or like noticing 5 things that you see, 4 things that you feel, 3 things that you hear, 2 things that you smell, and 1 thing that you taste. And it basically just helps you, like it like forces you to be present, like brings you back to the here and now. So that's like usually helps if I'm feeling like I'm really not present or if I'm just like kind of out of my body a little bit. And then when I'm zoning out, I think something that was really helpful is because when I was in DBT group, this would happen a lot. And you know, thank God for like the DBT group leaders who were so like really looking out for each one of us. And whenever that would happen, she would be like, do you want some ice? And she would go and get me a pack of ice. And like, I would just hold it to my face to also just help me like stay in the present. And I also kind of just, now that I notice it, especially like in individual sessions, when I notice it, I was just like shake my head. It's like as if I'm just trying to shake my head back into like clear vision. Sometimes it doesn't work, especially if it's like even more of a difficult topic that we're discussing. But like for the most part, I just like really trying to be present has helped. And then for that numbing type of dissociation, I mean, I don't really have a way of dealing with it because I don't really feel like I want to deal with it. It's actually like adaptive in the short term, but I usually now tell myself like, okay, like you feel fine now, but you're probably going to feel like shit in a few hours or when you wake up. So just like being prepared for the pain that's to come, because I don't know, at sometimes I've been like, oh, I don't feel anything. I'm fine. I'm always going to be fine. But then I'm like, oh crap, now I feel it like shit. So it's like good to prepare yourself for that.
I will say that none of the things that I do successfully like make dissociation go like away in the short term. So like using temperature, like the cold water does really help. Working through it in therapy, like doing exposure helps, especially for like not being as activated the next time. Like that's sort of more preventative. Like the more I work through certain issues, the less dissociated I am when they come up. But once it is there, the only thing that I have ever found that actually makes it go completely away is when I go to sleep. It's like my brain resets, I wake up the next day, and I can start again as a new person. But otherwise, like I can reduce its intensity, but never make it go away unless I sleep.
I don't know why I had this idea that like skills typically just work for people. That's like not a good assumption. But I experienced the same thing where it's just like I do all the grounding and, you know, try my best with that stuff, but it doesn't really do anything. I think like I honestly just kind of have to accept the fact that it's happening and just like ride it out. But like also being preventative and like, you know, if I see it coming on, okay, like I'm gonna take a cold shower or something.
Yeah, it can be hard to see when it's coming on. I wonder like if you'd be open to sharing like how you know when it's coming on, because I think that can be really hard for folks. I know it was for me for a long time.
Yeah, I think like a good indicator, like I said, is like when I'm staring at the wall. And like when I'm really engaged in something creatively, and then I notice I'm just all of a sudden not, because that's like a huge red flag for me, since I'm kind of someone that like my brain is just constantly going. So I notice when it's, becoming empty, and I'm like, okay, something's up.
That's the same for me. I feel like there are two reasons why I struggle to string a sentence together. One is I'm thinking too many things at once, and it's hard for me to decide which thing to pull out. But if it's because there's nothing there, it's just like, oh, ball of fluff. What is this? This is not a word. Then it's like, okay, this is dissociation happening. I'm kind of experiencing it a little bit right now because I'm going through something like outside of this episode. So I'm sitting here, I'm using the back end of a pen just in my hand like this, just sort of rubbing it, so because I don't want to make a loud noise like for the camera to pick up. Otherwise I would normally have I do have these 3D printed slugs that I usually use during a therapy session. They're like my tactile
That's so
thing.
Cool.
And so if we weren't recording, I would be sitting here going like this, but because this is very loud, I'm not going to. But like I'm sitting here with the back end of a pen, just sort of like rubbing in my hand so it won't make a lot of noise, just trying to use that as a way to like stay connected to my body.
I love that you're
Adult Play-Doh here.
I have my squishy.
Oh my
I don't know
God.
what this is. What is that?
This is Serena. She's my friend. I play with her hair.
That's
Oh my God.
awesome. So the other part of symptom 9 is transient stress-related paranoia. With BPD, people may see signs and symptoms of like people being hostile where maybe there isn't necessarily an actual hostile intent. How many times have I sent someone a text and didn't hear back and was like, oh my gosh, they hate me?
A lot of times in BPD, like I think the paranoia is also just like usually has this like interpersonal flavor to it, just like a lot of things with BPD. For me, a lot of it's like maybe feeling like, oh, like if people are talking together in a room and like feeling like, oh, people might be talking about you, or like Xannie said, sometimes like if someone texts me something, or if I text someone something and then they don't like respond for a while, I'm like, oh my God, did I say something wrong? Did they not like me? And it kind of, I think it definitely gets worse under periods of stress, hence the stress-related paranoid ideation. When I was at one of my worst times with BPD at work, I felt like everyone hated me. And there was kind of a sense of truth to that, because they gave me like a promotion title that they didn't give to other people, and people were pissed about it. But I didn't want to try to go to lunch with anyone. Like I really felt like everyone was against me. And it was really difficult. It can be difficult to like fight against sometimes, because our minds are just like, we really believe them sometimes. But it's good to challenge what our thoughts are.
Sometimes we're right about things. Like I feel like sometimes it's like, okay, I have this thing, this symptom, whatever, and then like anything happens and it's like, oh, that was just me being paranoid, or that was just me fearing abandonment, or that kind of thing. Which is why like I feel like checking the facts is pretty important, because you're right, like sometimes those things do have truth to them. Like I've had similar experiences with work, and it's like I wasn't being paranoid, like people really were being unkind. So it's like, I don't know, finding that balance, I guess.
Yeah, it makes it more confusing when it's like actually happening and you're like, is this actually happening or it's not?
I've definitely experienced a little bit more like very veering towards delusional paranoia, but I still know it's not real, but I have these very fantastical paranoid ideas. Like one that I used to think, and still comes up sometimes, but I'm more able to be like, that's ridiculous, is like, I used to be paranoid that my therapist hired my boyfriend to date me like out of pity so that I wouldn't be alone. Like those kind of like paranoid thoughts, or like, like more like, I don't know if anybody remembers or has seen the movie about Jim Carrey where he's like living in this like fake reality that's like a TV show, and everybody else.
The Truman Show.
The Truman Show. Yeah, sorry, you're right. But yeah, like where everyone else is actors, but he doesn't know it, and he's the only one who like thinks it's real. Like
That
I used
movie
to have a
messed
lot
me
more
up,
like,
man.
yeah,
I used to think like my entire family has this agenda and they're not telling me.
yeah. So people with BPD can also experience that too, right? Where it's like it's very outlandish. And yeah, I find that like stuff like I have a friend who really loves The Matrix and like kind of stuff like that. It's like very meta. I cannot with that stuff. Like I cannot even think about because it's like my brain will go there and be like, what if we are in the Matrix, right?
Yeah. Well, one of the things that I think sort of separates, and you touched on this, that separates like even those more extreme things from like the sort of psychotic delusions is that sort of what you said, where it's like you're not convinced you have absolute proof that is real. It's just this like the fear of it potentially being real are very powerful and like hard to like convince yourself that it's not true. And I think what's challenging about a lot of this is because there is some level of awareness, there's this tension between what we observe in other people and what their actual intentions are, because we can't observe people's intentions. We can observe their behaviors, which can communicate intention, but it's very hard because we can't actually see into their minds and know without a shadow of a doubt like what this person is trying to do, right? And so I feel like since there's an aspect of awareness, we can recognize that we can't be totally sure. It makes it very hard to know when you can trust your instincts. For me, that's something that I'm kind of fine tuning now, because sort of through the recovery, the beginning part, it was more like, I'm just never going to trust my instincts ever. And I'm always going to assume that if someone's hurting my feelings, I'm overreacting because I was very, aggressive to people in the past, and I acted out in a lot of ways. And my rationalization to myself was, well, even if they are trying to be a jerk, it's better for me to act like they're not, because I don't want to do something that I'm not going to be able to take back, right? But now I'm kind of in a position where
Right.
I'm always sacrificing my interpretation of something for the sake of not creating a problem. And so I'm trying to get better at being able to recognize like, oh no, like this person has a history of kind of saying insensitive things. And, it's true, I can't observe their intention, but do I want to be around that all the time? I don't think so. Stuff like that. But it's hard to do that. And I still find that I'm sometimes in positions where I am completely ignoring that gut feeling because I'm just like, can't trust that.
It's a dangerous place to be, honestly, from my own experiences, but just like completely not trusting yourself.
That's how I feel when I go on dates. It's like I'm like, oh my god, is this person horrible or is it just my brain?
Yeah.
But like that's where like Devon, like what you said about checking the facts, like that's where that skill really comes in. And with checking the facts in DBT, it's kind of like you list out all the possible interpretations of what's going on around you. Like try to describe the situation in terms of facts instead of your interpretations. Notice your interpretations and then try to like reframe it. And there's definitely like a balance, like Xannie said. It's like sometimes you feel like you want to be able, like if you feel like someone's gonna hurt you, or you feel like someone hurt you, and it's not always great to always give other people the benefit of the doubt, because what if they are actually like, there is reality in this. So that's why it's really important to like check the facts and check what your assumptions are. Like it's very helpful. Like otherwise you're just gonna believe those lies in your head.
Checking the facts is a big one. And I think like the fine tuning part is the real struggle, because I'm definitely at the point where I can like come up with a bunch of different interpretations, but sometimes they're just really, especially in interactions with people you don't know well, where there's no track record to go from. It's kind of like I find that I often just have to pick the most effective interpretation rather than the one that may actually be right, because I don't have enough information to go on. In my personal life with somebody I know well or have enough context to be able to make a more educated guess on their intention, or even just ask them. This is one of the things that I can't believe it took me like 30 years to think about and I didn't even think of this. My therapist was like, why don't you just ask people what they mean? Just ask them.
So simple.
And I was like, oh.
That felt really validating.
I was like, oh, you can, I don't know. It was like, you can do that?
If people aren't communicating clearly, that's partially on them also. You know, like I've had to let go of a lot of those like friendships with people who tend to be more passive aggressive or don't know how to communicate directly while in recovery, because I can't pick up on that all the time. And if you can't communicate like what's going on clearly, like this is not going to work. Not just because I have BPD, because that's like what you need to do in relationships, right? Because if I'm constantly having to guess, yeah, that's when I start to like get really confused about what's going on and either like assume malintent or like always be trying to give people the benefit of the doubt and getting hurt. And it's like, I think part of what's helped me in recovery is really focusing on like building those friendships with people who will, like, I don't have to worry about how they feel or wonder what's going on. Like I've had friends that since I got in recovery, I was like, yeah, this ain't gonna work, you know. And I've had other friends where it's like, I don't have to stress because I know that they will communicate with me.
Xannie, what you were saying before about like how well you know someone and how that kind of plays into whether or not you can like decide or figure out whether or not like you're being paranoid or this is actually happening. That felt really validating because you don't know someone, you don't know anything about them, and you don't have those like clues to rely on there. I never thought about that.
When that's the case, to like try and look at it objectively, like if that person, you know, said that thing to someone else, would I think it was bad? Or is it just because I am so like emotionally, you know, dysregulated right now or whatever it is? When I was like in treatment, I remember what my very first interaction with the program director, like I was really anxious and like needed help from a therapist that was like nearby talking to her or something or whatever. And I asked for something, I forget what it was, but she just made a comment like, or you could ruminate about it. And I was like taken back. I was like, oh, was that like a normal comment or was that really rude? And like at the end of the day, it was really rude.
Yeah.
I don't know.
It's hard to figure it out.
It's hard to also know what is appropriate to expect from other people at different levels of closeness. You know, sometimes we get signals that from people very early that are indications of problems, because there are certain things that you maybe don't disclose to somebody that you first met, but because we have sometimes, at least I definitely know, I've had a hard time not, you know, disclosing some of those things. When other people have disclosed them to me, it didn't show up as a red flag because it didn't occur to me, oh, this isn't a thing that you tell someone you don't know. And so then there's some of that too that plays into how we interpret people's, because all we really have to go on is our own experience, right? Because we sometimes don't know how to view like red flags in other people. One of the things that can be very helpful is reaching out to somebody else just to get their like, as you know, do our best to describe the situation as factually and unbiased as we can, and then, you know, get feedback from what it looks like to an outside observer. I would say like pick your outside observers carefully. Like I don't just go to anybody and be like, what do you think about this? You know, I would go to somebody who knows me well enough to be able to interpret the way that I communicate, all of that stuff, right? I have found that that's very helpful, especially when I was very early in my recovery. I called my dad a lot because I had a hard time coming up with enough possible alternative explanations for someone's behavior. So even just calling somebody to be like, okay, here's a situation, what are all the interpretations you can come up with for this? That really helped me to be able to come up with those and then sort of follow all of those to their logical conclusions and then decide where to move on from there.
Circling back to check the facts, basically.
Yeah, but I definitely agree choosing your outside perspective very carefully. I when I started dating my partner, I just had to go to my therapist with everything because I love my friends, but you know, sometimes what can happen is if you go to your friends, one will say one thing, another will say another, and then you get even more confused than you were before. And
that is the worst place for me. When I go to people and they all give me different advice, I feel like I'm suffocating because I want to make everyone happy and I have to pick one solution. I don't know if I would say that that's like pathological or like a BPD problem. I feel like that's a problem for a lot of people. If you care about other people, you're going to be strongly affected by being in the middle. But for me, that is like the worst. I just want to do the right thing. Why can't there be one right answer? Ah!
Yeah.
There are a lot of different right answers.
Mm-hmm.
And symptom 9 as a whole is the one that I am working the hardest to get rid of. Because I like the paranoia, not being able to stand other people not liking me, being concerned about how much they like me and how satisfied they are with what I've done. That is probably the most emotionally activating. Like I am least capable of regulating my response to criticism.
Yeah. I think for me, one thing that's been really helpful is as much as I'm looking for signs that somebody doesn't like me or looking for red flags or what have you, like also taking that balanced approach of like, what are maybe some green flags that I might be missing, or what's like information that I'm filtering out to support this like paranoid bias that I'm having. Because I think for me, one thing that can show up in relationships, for example, is I can really, really obsess over getting the sort of like just right response from my partner, like the just right behavior where I'm like, okay, if he does this, it means he cares about me. And if he doesn't, it means he doesn't, right? Like one thing, I use this example with my clients all the time is like, we have a significant time difference right now, my partner and I. And so like, you know, he goes to bed early, and as much as I've been like, hey, can you let me know like before you go to sleep? Like sometimes like last night he drove like till like late to visit his family, got there and just like crashed right away. And like not crashed the car, like crashed, like went to sleep. And I like have struggled for like a lot of our relationship of being like, that means he doesn't like me, right? Like just like, cause he didn't call me last night, that means he doesn't care about me. And so I've had to like really adjust and be like, okay, like not everything is black or white. Like it, like, you know, it could be that he was just tired and he went to sleep, right? Like it doesn't every time that like like the behavior I'm looking for doesn't happen, or somebody does something that I'm like, oh, I know exactly what that means. I don't. And that's okay. You know, I don't have to be on the hunt for, you know, the bad scary monster.
For a lot of these things, like that those types of situations, I'm pretty good. Like I can, if I have really vague signals, like somebody just not answering me, those are a lot easier for me. If somebody doesn't answer me and it's been like a long time, I use that as an opportunity to kind of reach out and make sure that they're okay, and kind of phrase it in like a, hey, I didn't hear from you in the last 24 hours. I just wanted to make sure everything's okay with you. Partially because I have made the mistake of assuming people are ignoring me, and almost always it doesn't have anything to do with me. It's usually their own stuff, and that's kind of taught me to have that reaction. It's more when somebody says to me like, we need to talk, or something where it's there is some sort of unknown implied that is very hard for me to steer away from paranoid thoughts. It's like, because then they're opening a can of worms with zero direction. It could literally be anything, right? I think I'm good at not lashing out at people in reaction, but knowing what to do with that emotion and to soothe myself is still very hard.
What are you guys feeling right now?
I feel like very much of like an imposter in a way, because up until getting to this symptom, I really felt like for the most part, BPD is kind of like in my past, and what I experience now is just what it means from being sensitive. But I think, you know, this is the one that when I talk about it, because I still struggle with just this one symptom so much, it makes me feel like everything else I've said up to this point is a lie.
Not true. Some symptoms are just more difficult.
You have a little bit more connection with it, so that like when people listen to the episode, they'll feel a little bit more heard.
They're like kind of weird symptoms because they're not defined super clearly. They could, like, they're interpreted wrong a lot of the time, and they're also just like, they're just like difficult things to target, because these are things that like a lot of these things are just things that happen subconsciously, so we have to like put a lot more effort to be mindful and really like notice the cues, or the like when you're experiencing these things.
I relate to the recovery thing of like having an issue looking at it kind of black and white, but you really can't, because it's just like absolutely never going to be perfect.
I always have this perception that if I give myself any kind of label, then other people will hold me to some sort of rigid standard of whatever they associate with that. And I am terrified of not meeting people's expectations, which is why up until like most recently, I didn't try. I had this like, if I'm already a failure, then people aren't going to hold me to high expectations. Now that I'm actually stable enough to try, there are certain things that I'm finally facing. All of that is coming up now, and I'm actually having to deal with it because I just never pushed myself far enough that it ever came up.
Just like major avoidance. I feel like I've also done that, where there were just years of like zero insight, partly because I was like a little bit delusional when I was dating. But yeah, I'm thankful for being self-aware for sure.
That's the thing about recovery, is there's no like you get to a point and you're like perfect and nothing's wrong. Like reality is hard, whether you have a personality disorder or not, you know? And like recovery means that, yeah, sometimes this stuff still comes up, you know? And like we have more skills to cope with it, you know, and it doesn't mean that there's anything wrong with us. I feel like I'm such a DBT therapist whenever I go, and so annoying.
No, and I love that though.
I love it.
It's so good. This is the last episode of the season, so anybody have any like other like profound ending thoughts you want to like get out there?
This has been the most incredible experience, and I don't even know how to put into words how amazing this has been. I'm so excited for the next season. I hope that everyone watching this is so excited for the next season.
Yeah, I mean, this has been very cool to participate in, and also just even on the episodes I'm not on, to watch and to hear people share their experience and be like, oh my gosh, wow. And I've also even like learned like tips for my own recovery from like watching the other episodes, and I'm so thankful for all the work that you're putting into this, Xannie, and all the folks that are supporting as well, that aren't just showing up like myself. You know, I really appreciate it, and I think a lot of people are going to get a lot out of this too.
Yeah, it starts the conversation, I think.
I'm so glad that we were able to make this first season. I have had a lot of fun, and it's been a really good growth opportunity. You know, definitely a lot of stress and challenges along the way, but I feel like also, at least for me, if there aren't uncomfortable, stressful moments, then I'm not really gonna grow more. And I think at some point recovery for me became like not just like not being dysfunctional, but being like getting the most out of life that I possibly can, like being as recovered as my goal isn't to be normal. My goal is to be the best version of myself that I possibly can be, you know? Like,
yeah, normal's
like
boring.
right? So, thank you everyone so much. Wherever you came in on our journey, we so appreciate you. Make sure that you like, subscribe, and turn on your notifications, because we will be back for a season 2. Our plan is to be back in February. In the meantime, follow us on Instagram. We do post regular updates and what's going on with us there. I hope that you have an amazing start to your year, and we will see you before too long. Bye.